My name is Clara Whitmore, and if you're hearing this, I want you to understand something sometimes. The person you fear most isn't a stranger. Sometimes it's the person who raised you. When Dad died, the house didn't just feel empty, it felt haunted. Not by ghosts, but by the weight of everything he left behind. His books, his tools, his smell, and the quiet echo of his voice that still lived in the corners. I tried to keep things together, to be the responsible daughter he always trusted me to be. But peace doesn't last long when greed starts whispering through the walls. It began 2 weeks after the funeral. The lawyer had just left, leaving me with a thin folder that felt heavier than my entire life. Inside was Dad's will. He'd left me his savings, the property, and the small repair business he'd built from nothing. It wasn't fortune, it was legacy. I wasn't proud, I was honored. But when Mom showed up that night, wearing her black mourning dress and her diamond earrings, I knew something was coming. She sat across from me in the study, the air still thick with my father's scent. "Clara," she began softly, "you know your father didn't mean for you to keep all this for yourself." I looked at her, confused. "That's exactly what he wrote, Mom." She gave me that smile she used to wear when I was little, the one that meant I was about to be scolded. "Don't be naive. Your father only wrote it that way because he trusted you'd take care of me. You have your pension," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "You have your house. Dad made sure you were secure." She frowned. "That's not the point. The business, the savings, he built those with me by his side. They're mine as much as yours." I took a breath. "He wanted me to manage it, Mom. You said yourself you didn't want to deal with that stuff." Her lips tightened. "That was before I realized how much he left you. You think it's fair? I'm his wife." I looked at her, and for a moment I saw not my mother but a stranger with sharp eyes and restless hands. "It's not about fair," I said quietly. "It's about what Dad decided." She slammed her hand on the table, the sound echoing through the study. "You ungrateful girl, you think a piece of paper matters more than family." My voice trembled, but I stood my ground. "It's not about the paper. It's about respect for what he wanted." For a long second, she just stared at me and something inside her shifted. Her face softened, but her eyes didn't. "If you don't reconsider," she said finally, "we'll have a family meeting. You won't win this alone." And then she left. Her heels clicked down the hallway, sharp and final. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at the will, at Dad's signature, at the line that said, "For Clara, who stayed when others turned away." By morning, the phone started ringing. Cousins, uncles, aunts, everyone wanted to talk. Everyone suddenly had an opinion. They told me Mom was grieving, that I was being selfish, that it wasn't right for one person to keep everything. Every conversation ended the same way. "Just do the right thing, Clara." But no one had been there when Dad was coughing blood and begging for her attention. No one had seen her turn up the TV and say she couldn't handle that kind of negativity. I had. When I refused to give her anything, the tone changed. The calls became cold. Someone even left a message on my voicemail. "Don't make this ugly, Clara. You'll regret it." Then one morning, I found a note taped to my door. "Family meeting. Sunday, 5 p.m. Be there." No name, but I knew her handwriting. The rest of the week was a blur of anxiety. I couldn't focus on work. I couldn't sleep. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped. Finally, on Friday, I called Aunt Rose, Dad's older sister. She was the only one who'd stayed by our side through everything. When I told her what was happening, there was silence on the line for a few seconds. Then she said in a low voice, I was afraid she'd pull this, "Don't worry, Clara. You won't be alone at that meeting." Her voice had a weight to it, calm but deliberate, and for the first time that week, I exhaled. Sunday came fast. It rained that morning, the kind of steady, cold rain that feels like a warning. I sat in my car outside Mom's house for 10 minutes before going in. Every car from our family was there, my brother's truck, my cousin's SUV, Aunt Lily's blue sedan. When I opened the door, the noise stopped. They were all in the living room, Mom at the center, her arms crossed, eyes sharp. "There she is," my cousin Ben said, "the golden daughter." I ignored him and sat down. "So," I said, "what's this about?" Mom looked around dramatically, as if she were speaking to an audience. "It's about fairness, Clara. Your father's estate belongs to this family. We're just asking you to share what's right." I clenched my hands under the table. Dad's will wasn't vague, Mom. You can't just, to my brother Nate, cut me off. You think you're better than us because Dad spoiled you. I looked at him, feeling my chest tighten. Spoiled me. I was the one who stayed when he was dying, Nate. Where were you? His face reddened. "That's not the point." Mom raised a hand, pretending to calm everyone. "We don't want to fight. We're family. Let's just agree you'll transfer half of what your father left. That's all I'm asking." "And if I don't?" I asked. Her smile vanished. "Then we'll contest the will. You'll lose everything, Clara. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I was shaking, but not from fear. Something in me, something buried deep, was finally starting to wake up. Then the door opened. Aunt Rose stepped in, her umbrella dripping, her face calm but firm. "Sorry I'm late," she said. I wanted to hear this from everyone's lips. The room went silent. Even Mom's confidence cracked for a second. Rose sat beside me, resting a file on the table. "Clara told me what's happening," she said slowly. "And I think you should all know something before this goes further." Mom's jaw tightened. "This is a private family matter, Rose." "Exactly," she said. "And I'm family." She opened the file, pulled out a paper, and slid it toward Mom. "That's the real version of the business agreement. The one you signed years ago when you demanded Dad take your name off the company because you didn't want legal responsibilities. You remember that, don't you?" The color drained from Mom's face. Aunt Rose continued. "Legally, you gave up any claim. You can contest the will all you want, but the business, the savings, the property, they're all protected." The room buzzed with whispers. My brother looked from Mom to me, confused. "Is that true?" Mom didn't answer. Her eyes darted around, searching for control, but she had none. Aunt Rose leaned back. "Your father was smart, Clara. He knew what was coming. He made sure you couldn't be cornered." I felt tears sting my eyes. "You mean he prepared for this," she said softly. "He trusted you because you earned it." For the first time since Dad's death, I felt a warmth spread in my chest, a mix of relief and quiet anger. Mom stood, her voice shaking with rage. "You think this is over? You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone?" "No," I said, standing too. "You did that yourself." The room went dead silent. Rain hit the windows harder. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You'll regret this, Clara. I'll make sure of it." I didn't flinch. "You already did, Mom, the day you chose money over your daughter." When I left the house, Aunt Rose followed me to my car. Before I got in, she said, "You did well, but don't think she'll stop here." I nodded, "I know." That night, I sat on my bed, staring at my phone. Messages from relatives poured in insults, guilt trips, threats. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I opened my dad's old journal, flipped to the last page, and read the words he'd written a week before he passed. "If you ever feel alone, remember this truth always outlives lies." I smiled through my tears. They thought I was alone. They had no idea what was coming. And if you're still watching this story unfold, make sure you subscribe to her Retaliation, because what happened next, even I didn't see it coming. They kept saying I was alone, but I had allies I hadn't let them see yet. Aunt Rose was one of them. She had the kind of steady loyalty that doesn't roar, it simply stays, like an old oak. When she stood with me in that living room, I felt the first tremor of power. It wasn't a glorious power, it was a practical one: knowledge, paperwork, witnesses. I started by breathing. It sounds naive, as if the breath itself could steal me, but there's a clarity that comes right before you decide to stop pretending. I read everything my father left me. Contracts, receipts, letters he'd hidden in false bottoms of drawers. He'd been careful. He'd been meticulous in the way someone prepares for a storm he knows is coming. He had left instructions for contingencies, names of trusted accountants, even the code to the safe in his office. He believed in planning. I would use that faith like armor. Aunt Rose and I sat down and made a list. Not a long, dramatic list, just a short, cold ledger of what needed to be done. Secure the accounts, notify the bank about possible contest attempts, run for legal counsel that wasn't tangled with my mother's acquaintances, and quietly document every interaction. I learned that quiet was often louder than loud, when people were relying on lies to hold them together. I wanted no physical confrontation. I wanted to unspool their confidence and show them calmly that the scaffolding they built on falsehood would not support them. My mother's weapon was the family name, the pity she could manufacture with a sympathetic face at brunch. Her weapon was the network of relatives who would, given a push, circle like moths to a porch light. My weapon would be facts, timing, and the slow dismantling of everyone who'd stood with her. I began with the bank. The account my father had kept was in one place, but the business accounts had multiple signatures. My name was on the primary account, thanks to the will and the paperwork Dad had finalized months before he died. I went to the bank during a midweek lull with Aunt Rose by my side. We explained calmly that a contest had been hinted at and requested temporary protective holds on major transfers until the executor's decisions were solidified. The banker was polite, professional, and quietly impressed by the documentation we brought. He placed the holds without fanfare. We left feeling momentarily untouchable. Next came the company ledger. Dad had kept his old records, and a young accountant he'd trusted, Sam Herrera, still worked with him part-time. I met Sam in the back room of the shop, where oil. Streaked windows let in cold light, and the smell of engine grease lingered like a memory. Sam was nervous. He had family ties that touched both sides of the dispute, but he had integrity. He'd kept careful books because my father had insisted on it. Sam agreed to help me compile the facts, payroll histories, invoices that had been redirected, checks that had funny endorsements. As we worked, pattern after pattern emerged. Money had been slipped here and there into accounts that weren't business related. Expenses were padded, a line of small, charitable payments funneled into a card with my mother's name on it. It wasn't enough to indict anyone criminally on the spot, but it was more than enough to prove bad faith. I printed everything and made 2 neat stacks, one for legal counsel, one for the public. I would need both. I would need to make my mother feel not threatened with violence, but exposed in the way that would hurt her most, reputation and control. People forget names quickly, but they remember stories. So I started collecting stories. Small ones, the minor indignities that, when strung together, formed a pattern impossible to explain away as coincidence or misunderstanding. The time Mom had cashed a check meant for Dad's medication and told him it fell through the cracks. The time she sold an old bedroom set and claimed she was clearing clutter. The way she always had an extra dress for the next church auction. Aunt Rose had a stack of these vignettes, and so did Sam. I wrote them down carefully and unemotionally, like minutes from a meeting. Emotion is the enemy of documentation. It clouds the view. I worked to see things as a bookkeeper would, line by line, balanced. I also hired a lawyer, not an expensive one, though I could afford that if I needed, but someone thorough and blunt. Her name was Marcia Levine, and she had a reputation for defending the overlooked kid and making the entitled uncomfortable. She asked me 3 questions when I first sat with her. What do you want? How far will you go? And do you want people destroyed or corrected? I told her the truth. I wanted them corrected, seen for what they were, and given the chance to become better if they could. She smiled like she agreed. That's not soft, she said. That's strategic. With Marcia's counsel, we set steps. First, preserve the estate from dissipation. Second, prepare for a possible will contest by gathering witness statements that confirmed my father's intentions over time. Third, plan a course of public disclosure if the family escalated into slanderous territory. She advised caution. She emphasized procedure. There was safety in structure. While the legal scaffolding rose, I worked in quieter ways. I called my employer and arranged flexible schedules. I walked the shop with Sam, learning details I'd never known. I cleaned out my father's office, not because I was sentimental, but because I wanted to see how he'd arranged things, how he'd guarded what he cared about. In the bottom drawer of his desk, behind a false back, I found a folder wrapped in a ribbon. It was a private thing, letters Dad had written to me over the years, a few apology notes, and a short letter addressed plainly, for Clara, if anything should happen to me. My hands shook as I read it in the dim light, but the words steadied me. He had been proud and he had been scared. He had written about resilience and kindness, but more than that, he had written about trust, who deserved it and who didn't. He reminded me that fairness doesn't always mean equality, and that stewardship sometimes looks like solitude. He asked me not to waste the life he had built by letting greed poison what was left. He closed by telling me to act with the same decency he had tried to teach me, even when decency felt insufficient. I kept the letter in my bra like a talisman. It was a small thing, but it rooted me. Meanwhile, Mom's team, the relatives who were skilled at performative mourning and public sympathy, began their work. They sent messages that could have come from a scriptwriter. We're trying to keep the family together. Don't make decisions in anger. Think about Mom's heart. It smelled of manipulation. I read them and let them sit in a folder I titled The Record. I stopped answering. In the vacuum created by my silence, rumors filled the space like dust on furniture. One evening, my brother Nate came to my door. He hadn't called. He hadn't bothered to visit much while Dad was ill, but here he was now, leaning against the frame like a man who'd practiced sympathy in the mirror. He wanted to talk. He wanted, he said, to know if we could come to an amicable arrangement. The noun had a syrup to it, like he was offering honey to cover a bitter pill. He looked tired, not the tired that comes from work, but the weary fatigue of someone who'd been living under the strain of secrets. Maybe he, too, had a conscience that woke up at odd hours. I listened while he spoke. He blamed pressure. He blamed Mom's friends and the squeaky wheel of expectations. He said things that, if he meant them, might have saved all of us a lot of trouble. When he left, he hugged me, briefly and awkwardly. I told him I loved him like I always had, but I couldn't hand over what Dad had entrusted me with. He lingered at the doorstep a moment, looked back, and then left. I watched him go and felt a strange sorrow. Revenge would not numb that sorrow. It would clarify its edges. The first public move came quietly. Aunt Rose arranged a small luncheon at the church hall under the pretense of family fellowship. The guest list was contrived to include neighbors, a few church members, and one local reporter who owed Aunt Rose a favor from years ago. Nobody was to know that the luncheon had another purpose, to set the stage for what would happen next. I planned my approach like a chess player setting up a gambit. The week before, I had Sam prepare a clean copy of the business's financials stripped of dusty language, annotated only where necessary. We handed a copy to the reporter with a simple note. If anyone asks why the family is squabbling over money, here's a transparent look at why it should never have been a controversy. The reporter, a man named Felix, had an honest face and a tendency to love a well-structured narrative. He promised discretion and a fair peace. At the luncheon, my mother arrived with her practiced face, palms smoothed as she greeted people like a queen distributing consolation. She perched at the head of the table and smiled like someone who believed the room could be influenced by charm. As she rose to say a few awkward words about family and togetherness, I felt my pulse match the rhythm of the overhead fan. Felix began his piece the next morning. It was not an exposed not yet, but a quiet human interest story about family, legacy, and the complexities of inheritance. He quoted the ledger in part, citing the careful management Dad had put in place and noting how those measures sometimes caused discomfort and grief. He wrote about fairness vs. perceived entitlement and quoted an anonymous source saying the best way forward was legal clarity, not slander. He did not attack my mother. He did not raise his voice. He simply offered the community a clear, readable version of the facts. That article changed the air. Sympathy that had been funneled toward my mother found itself scattered by plain numbers and a gentle voice asking readers to look before they judged. People began to ask questions. The church ladies, the grocery store clerk, even the neighbor who'd always smiled too wide at family barbecues, they started to shift. It was subtle, the way a room cools when the windows open. Not everything changed overnight, but the momentum shifted from a tide of gossip to a trickle of reason. My mother's phone calls became more frantic. Her friends, who had been so willing to stand by her, suddenly sounded unsure when she told them she was preparing to contest the will. Seeds of doubt had been planted, and doubt, unlike rage, grows quietly and stubbornly. But my plan was not merely to sway public opinion. I wanted to corner them into a place where they had to choose one of two things: either redeem themselves and accept reasonable terms, or expose themselves further through impulsive, damaging actions. I needed to give them an option that felt like mercy, while ensuring they understood the consequences of choosing otherwise, so I proposed mediation. Marcia drafted a neutral, court-recognized mediation proposal and sent it to my mother's counsel with a note. We seek clarity and closure, not vendettas. Let us settle this fairly, publicly, and with dignity. The letter was formal, kind, and immovable. It was a mirror that invited reflection. Mom refused. She accused me of trying to smear her with public theatrics. She said she wanted to keep family matters private, but she had already blinded herself with noise, and noise begets exposure. Her refusal became a signal. 2 days later, beneath a sky washed pale by early autumn sun, my mother made a move that would be the beginning of her undoing. She filed for a preliminary injunction to freeze certain assets, claiming, theatrically, that I was withdrawing funds in bad faith. She crowed about evidence she claimed to have about witnesses who would testify that my father had been unwell when he signed the will. She made statements to the local paper and to our extended family. She painted me as cold, uncaring, a daughter who preferred a ledger to a hug. She sought to make me the villain so she could be the victim. It was all performance, the kind of performance that assumes people will pick sides based on the loudest cry. I let her talk. I let the cameras flash. I let her file motions. Marcia filed responses. Sam sent affidavits. Aunt Rose provided witnesses who could place Dad's intentions in clear context. The judge, thankfully, asked for evidence, not for theater. The injunction was denied. The law, for once, acted like a bone thrown to a starving dog, not cruelty, but necessity. My mother's attorney called me and accused me of ambushing them with witnesses. He threatened appeals, press conferences, a systematic shredding of my reputation. I answered once, "We will do this properly." He did not like that. Proper is hard for people who rely on spectacle. That week, my mother called my brother and demanded he take her side publicly. He refused. He had spent an evening alone, drunk and honest, and apparently had seen something he didn't like. The family cameras were disoriented. The people who had relied on her scripts found their cues gone. When I returned to the shop after one of those meetings, an old client, Mrs. Ellery, pulled me aside. She clasped my hands in both of hers and said, Your father used to say when things are messy, you find the people who still remember the day before the mess. We remember him. We remember how he worked. We won't let his name be twisted. She handed me a pie she'd baked. It was a foolish, perfect kindness that tasted like sanity. My revenge was not a single strike. It was a series of methodical moves that made it harder for the family to cling to its narrative. I preserved finances, I gathered testimony, I opened slow leaks in my mother's armor. I never yelled, I did not need to. Watching her scramble was a quiet, sober thing. It did not bring joy, it brought resolution. In late October, she called me at midnight. Her voice sounded small. Can we talk? She whispered. I could hear movement in the background voices, maybe Aunt Lily, perhaps the distant echo of her social life unspooling. For a moment, I felt the old pull, the child who wants to soothe the parent. Then I remembered the blue ribbon and the letter. I remembered Dad's steady hand in his book. Not right now, I said. We've started a process. If you want to settle, do it through counsel. I did not add mercy to my sentence, because she had already scorned me for the same. She tried one more thing, a public plea on the church bulletin's community page, thinly veiled as a call for family unity. I watched it gather likes and then comment. Kind ones, questioning ones, the sort that pierced with polite doubt. The parishioner, who had been a longtime neighbor, commented that she'd always wondered why my mother had never learned the board meetings. Another wrote that fairness and trust mattered more than pressure. The tide turned, one small comment at a time. By the time the first hearing date arrived, the family looked smaller than it had 2 months before. My mother was composed, linen suit ironed, face arranged for headline photos. Her supporters watched with a brittle patience. I sat quietly in the back with Aunt Rose and Sam, feeling oddly serene. Whatever happened, I had done this with truth as my companion. The judge listened, read the documents, and asked pointed questions about intent and timing. When the courtroom crammed into a lunch hour and people whispered in the hall, I realized the surprising thing. About revenge, it is rarely satisfying in the way the movies promise. There were no triumphant orchestral swells. There were instead long pauses where the truth settled like dust, and dust, when it collects, shows shapes. He denied my mother's motion to freeze the estate, citing the evidence we had compiled. She left the courtroom white-faced. Her friends clustered around her and murmured consolation like they were tending a bruise. But the bruise had been exposed. Outside, a small cluster of neighbors had gathered, and one of them, a woman who had always admired my mother, looked at me and said softly, "We never knew." It was apology and pity and a tiny human acknowledgement that things had been wrong. Walking back to the car, I realized just how much ground I had covered. This wasn't a house divided by money anymore, it was a household learning to breathe without lies. Smothering it, I didn't believe in miracles, but I believed in consequences now. I believed in what careful, lawful exposure could do to the rod of entitlement. That night, Aunt Rose and I sat on the back porch with 2 mugs of tea and no illusions. We both knew there was more to do. The legal fight would take time, and my mother would no doubt escalate. But when the wind came and scattered the last of the dry leaves off the yard, I felt an odd peace, not triumph, not glee, just a sense that I was moving through a life my father had trusted me to steward. If you're following this, and you're thinking about what you'd do in my place, think about how fragile the stage is that people build for themselves when they choose lies over love. Think about the slow, surgical power of truth. If you want to hear the end of what happened, how the meeting that my mother threatened to orchestrate turned into the place where she had to swallow her own pride, then stay with me. There are people who believe the end of a story is always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, and sometimes the quiet is louder than any shout. And yes, if you want more stories like this, lessons of small justice and long patience, you know where to find them, her Retaliation. But this is not about a channel name or clicks. It's about what happens when you stand up for the life someone trusted you with. Part 3 will bring everything to a close. There will be a family meeting they won't forget, decisions they won't like, and a kind of mercy I never expected to extend. When you come back for the final part, you'll see how people who chose easy lies tried to rebuild from truth, or how some simply chose to leave the wreckage behind. Either way, I won't be the same Clara who sat across from Mom in that study. I've been remade by the things I did and the things I would not allow. The week after the family meeting felt strangely quiet, too quiet. You'd think after that explosion, people would back off, but silence isn't peace. It's the sound before something worse. Mom didn't call. She didn't text. My brother Nate went completely off the grid, but I knew that kind of calm only meant they were planning something. Aunt Rose called every other day to check in, but even she sounded tense. She's embarrassed, she said. and people like your mother don't handle humiliation well. I knew that was true. My mother's pride wasn't just a personality trait, it was her religion. One evening, I came home from work and found the mailbox overflowing with envelopes. Most were junk, but one caught my attention, a thick cream, colored one with the law firm's logo on the corner. My heart dropped before I even opened it. It was a notice of claim. Mom had filed to contest the will. I stared at the words until they blurred. The date, the court name, the signature, all of it screamed betrayal in black ink. I called Aunt Rose immediately. She actually did it. I said, my voice trembling, I expected she might. Rose replied, "Don't panic. She can try, but she'll lose. The documents are ironclad." "I know." I whispered, "But I don't want this. I just wanted peace." "Peace and justice don't always come together, Clara," she said softly. "Sometimes you have to fight to protect what's right." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my father's old chair, tracing the grain of the wood, remembering his hands. I could still hear him laughing, still hear the way he'd say, "You've got my stubbornness, Clara. Don't ever apologize for it." So I didn't. The next morning, I called the lawyer. If she wants a fight, I told him, then she's going to get one. But as I'd soon learn, legal battles weren't her only weapon. 2 days later, I came home to find my car tires slashed. The garage door was open, though I never left it that way. My stomach twisted. Inside, my father's tools were scattered everywhere, drawers pulled out, boxes overturned. I checked the security cameras. They were gone, every single one. That's when it hit me she wasn't trying to win in court. She was trying to break me before the hearing even started. I called the police, but they shrugged it off as possible vandalism. No evidence, no witnesses. I knew better. I called Aunt Rose again. "She's escalating." I said, "I know." She replied, "But don't react, not yet." Then what do I do? Wait, I've been working on something. She didn't explain, and I didn't press. But I trusted her. Days passed. Work became impossible. My mind was consumed by paranoia. Every shadow outside my window felt like a threat. Then one morning I saw her, Mom, standing across the street from my house, pretending to talk on her phone. Our eyes met. She smiled, that same sweet, venomous smile she used to wear when she wanted me to feel small. Then she turned and walked away. That was the moment something in me finally snapped. I wasn't the little girl she could guilt trip anymore. I wasn't going to beg for her approval. If she wanted a war, she was going to get one. The next week was all preparation. Aunt Rose and I met with the lawyer, reviewed the files, organized bank statements, property deeds, witness letters, everything that proved the truth. But Rose wasn't just focused on the legal side. She's hiding something. Rose said one night, "Your father mentioned once that she had debts, serious ones." Debts? I frowned. She always acted like she had everything handled. Rose smirked. "Your mother's ego is a mask, but I'm going to find out what's underneath." 3 nights later, she called me again, this time sounding triumphant. "Got it." She said, "Your mother has been borrowing money for years, private lenders, high interest. She's drowning, Clara. That's why she's desperate for your inheritance." I felt a dark satisfaction settle in my chest. So if that comes out, she'll lose everything. Rose finished, including her reputation. We both went quiet. The thought of exposing her, my own mother, made my stomach twist, but I remembered her standing outside my house, smiling like she already owned my future. I swallowed hard. "Do it," I said. The hearing came faster than expected. The courtroom smelled of old paper and polished wood. Mom sat across from me in a navy suit, her face calm, but her eyes burning. When the judge entered, she gave me a small, smug glance, the kind that said, "You're about to lose." Her lawyer started with the usual speech: grieving widow, unfair distribution, emotional stress. I didn't say a word. I just waited. Then Aunt Rose stood up. Her voice was steady, her expression unreadable. She handed over documents, bank records, letters of credit, even loan statements in Mom's name. "Mrs. Whitmore," Rose said, her tone cool, "do you deny these debts are yours?" Mom froze. "Those have nothing to do with answer the question," Rose interrupted. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitmore." Mom hesitated, then said tightly, "Yes, but then the motive is clear." Rose said, "She's contesting not because the will is unfair, but because she's insolvent." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Mom's lawyer looked uncomfortable. The judge sighed. "I've seen enough." He looked directly at her. "Mrs. Whitmore, you've abused this process. This case is dismissed." Just like that, it was over. I felt my knees go weak. The sound of the gavel echoed in my chest like thunder. Mom didn't look at me as she left the courtroom, but I saw the tremor in her hands. Aunt Rose placed a hand on my shoulder. "You won," she whispered, but I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt hollow. That night, I drove home in silence. I sat on the porch, watching the streetlights flicker. Part of me hoped she'd call, apologize, say something, anything. But the phone stayed silent. Then, around midnight, there was a knock at my door. It wasn't gentle. I froze. My porch light flicked on automatically. And there she was, Mom. Her hair was disheveled, her lipstick smeared, her eyes red from crying. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Clara," she whispered, "please let me in." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed no, but something in her voice, maybe desperation, made me open the door. She stepped inside slowly, glancing around as if she didn't recognize the place. They cut me off. She said, "Your uncle's your brother. They think I'm a liar. They won't talk to me. Maybe stop lying," I said softly. She flinched. "I know I messed up, okay? I was angry. But it's your fault, too. You embarrassed me in front of everyone." I stared at her. "You tried to destroy me." Her voice cracked. "I just wanted to feel important again." Something inside me broke. The hatred, the grief, the love all tangled together until I didn't know which was which. I turned away. "You should go, Mom." She grabbed my arm. "Clara, please, I have nowhere else to go." I looked at her hand, the same hand that once held mine when I was scared of the dark. "You made your choices," I said quietly. "Now you live with them." I pulled my arm free. She stood there for a moment, shaking, then walked out without another word. I locked the door behind her, but something told me it wasn't over. The next morning, I found another note on my doorstep. No name, just 5 words written in her handwriting. "You'll see what regret means." After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done. My mother never accepted defeat. She turned it into obsession. Every sound outside my window, every car that slowed down in front of my house made me flinch. I started double, locking the doors, keeping my phone charged at all times, sleeping with the light on. The peace I'd earned was already gone. 3 days passed before anything happened then. Just as I was starting to believe I might be paranoid, my world cracked open again. It was a Wednesday morning. I woke up to the sound of banging on my door. When I opened it, 2 police officers were standing there. "Are you Clara Whitmore?" One of them asked. "Yes." I said slowly, "We have a warrant to search your property." My heart stopped. "What? Why?" "Anonymous tip," the officer said, avoiding eye contact. "Possible stolen funds related to your father's estate." My throat went dry. That's impossible. But they didn't care. They came in, opened drawers, scanned papers, even checked my computer. I just stood there, numb. It was all a setup, and I knew exactly who was behind it. 2 hours later, they left empty, handed, "Sorry for the inconvenience." One of them said, "You understand, we had to check." As soon as the door shut, I collapsed onto the floor. My hands were shaking. She'd called the cops on me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive to her house and demand why she couldn't just stop. But then I remembered something Aunt Rose had said, "Don't react, retaliate." So I didn't react. I planned. That night, I drove to Rose's house. She was in her study, surrounded by files and old photographs. She sent the police. I said flatly. Rose looked up, sighed, and said, "Then it's time." Time for what? She handed me a small black folder. Inside were papers, legal documents, financial statements, and photos. "Your mother didn't just have debts," Rose said. "She's been embezzling money from the charity your father used to fund." I froze. "The Veterans Foundation." Rose nodded. "Yes, for years. Small amounts at first, donations were routed to her private accounts. But in the past year, it's become serious, tens of thousands." My mind went blank. "You're saying she stole from Dad's foundation." Rose's expression hardened. "She didn't just steal money. She stole his reputation." I clenched my fists. The anger was burning now, not just against her, but against myself for letting it go this far. "What do we do?" I asked. Rose leaned forward. "We expose her, but carefully. We'll do it her way in public." That weekend, there was another family dinner. It wasn't my idea, of course. Mom invited everyone again, claiming she wanted to make peace. I almost didn't go, but then I realized this was the perfect stage. When I arrived, the house looked perfect, like nothing had ever happened. The table was set, candles flickering, wine glasses lined up neatly. Mom greeted me at the door with that same fake warmth that used to fool everyone. "Clara," she said sweetly, "I'm so glad you came." I smiled. I wouldn't miss it. The family was already seated. Nate, my cousins, 2 uncles, even Aunt Lily. Everyone looked cautious, like they were walking into a trap but didn't know who'd said it. Mom clinked her glass. "Before we eat, I just want to say, I'm sorry for how things turned out. We've all made mistakes, but family should forgive each other." Everyone murmured politely. I didn't speak. She looked at me expectantly. "Clara," I raised my glass. "You're right, Mom. Family should forgive, but they should also know the truth before they do." A few heads turned. She smiled tightly. What are you talking about? I reached into my bag and placed the folder on the table. I thought you'd want to explain this. The color drained from her face. What is that? Nate asked. I opened it slowly. Bank statements from the Veterans Foundation. The one Dad built in his name. The one you, Mom, have been managing. Except, you weren't just managing it, were you? You were draining it. The room went silent. She tried to laugh. That's ridiculous. Aunt Rose, who had quietly slipped in through the side door, stepped forward. It's not ridiculous, she said. I verified every transaction. Clara's father trusted your mother with the accounts. She's been using the funds for personal expenses, credit card payments, spa bills, jewelry. My mother's voice cracked. You had no right, Rose slammed a document down, and the right to call the police on your own daughter, to accuse her of theft. Did you have that right? Everyone started talking at once, whispers, gasps, shock. My brother looked at her in disbelief. Mom, tell me this isn't true. Her lips trembled. I needed the money. You don't understand. You could have asked for help. I said, my voice breaking, but you chose to steal from Dad's name, from veterans who needed it. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they weren't guilt, they were panic. You don't get it. I had nothing left. Everyone expected me to be perfect after he died. I just wanted to keep pretending you were someone you're not, I said coldly. The room was dead quiet. Mom's breathing became shallow. You can't prove I did it. I pulled out my phone, opened a video, and pressed play. Her voice filled the room, a recording from a week ago, when she'd called me during one of her drunken rants. You think you're better than me, Clara. You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for me. That money, that business, it's mine. I earned it. I took what I deserved. I looked her in the eye. That's all the proof I need. She stood there frozen, staring at me, her mask finally breaking. Then she did what she always did when cornered. She tried to twist it. You set me up, she whispered. You've always wanted to ruin me. I shook my head slowly. No, Mom, you ruined yourself. I just stopped cleaning up after you. She started to cry real, raw, ugly sobs that shook her shoulders. But no one moved to comfort her. Not this time. Aunt Rose picked up her bag. The board at the foundation has already been informed. The authorities will handle the rest. Mom looked at me with hatred and desperation tangled in her eyes. You think you've won. You'll regret this, Clara. You'll regret making me your enemy. I stepped closer. You already were, Mom. I just finally stopped pretending you weren't. And then I walked out. Outside, the night air felt cold and sharp, like it was cutting through all the years of silence I'd swallowed. For the first time since Dad's death, I felt free. Aunt Rose followed me to the driveway. You okay? I nodded. Not yet, but I will be. She smiled faintly. Your father would be proud. We stood there in silence for a moment, the sound of crickets filling the space where pain used to live. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just sat on my porch, watching the sunrise slowly push the darkness away. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop news articles, messages, phone calls. Someone had leaked the story about the foundation. I didn't ask who, but I knew Rose had made sure the truth reached everyone. Mom disappeared after that. She sold the house, left town. No one knows where she went. Nate called once, said she was somewhere down south staying with a friend. I just said, I hope she finds peace, and hung up. Months passed. The foundation recovered. The business grew, and my life started to feel like mine again. One afternoon, while cleaning Dad's old desk, I found a letter sealed in an envelope with my name on it. The handwriting was his. I opened it with trembling hands. Clara, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I know your mother, her pride, her pain. She'll hurt you without meaning to, and when she does, you'll have to choose between kindness and justice. Choose justice, my girl. Kindness is wasted on those who use it as a weapon. I read that line over and over until the ink blurred. Then I smiled. He'd known this day would come, and somehow so had I. If you're still listening, remember this. Sometimes revenge isn't fire or fury. Sometimes it's simply letting the truth speak louder than the lies. This was my story. My name is Clara Whitmore, and this was her retaliation. And if you believe justice should never stay silent, subscribe. Because the next story might just be yours.